Howdy, guys, and welcome to night 73 of Big Brother Season 23's overnight feed recaps. And welcome to Cliff Notes from outside the Big Brother house. Night 73. We've only got 13 nights or so left to go in this season. We're getting to the end. We're at the end game. We've got the final four. Makes it a little tougher to do these overnight feeds sometimes because you don't have as much conversation going on. But that wasn't the case last night. We still had a few important conversations that I want to talk about this morning. So welcome aboard. First of all, as a bit of a recap, just in case any of y'all have forgotten the way we're set up right now, Xavier is the HOH. He is guaranteed a spot in the final three. Kyland and Azah are on the block. But it doesn't really matter because the veto winner who will decide who really goes home. Maybe. I got a little quiz for y'all that you can answer in the comments if you want to. When or what type of scenario would you have where the veto winner ends up not getting to decide who goes home this week? I'll just throw that out there. We'll talk about it at the end. But for most situations, the veto winner is going to make the final decision about who goes to the final three, who goes to jury. So we had some important conversations as a result of that. Now, the veto hasn't taken place yet. I expect that'll occur sometime this afternoon. So back to a typical Saturday afternoon veto type competition. It's going to be the most, as we say out throughout the whole season, the most important veto competition of the year. But this time it really is true. Someone's heart's going to be broken as a result of this veto competition. Big Brother 21, it was mine. This time, it's one of these four people right here. Well, one of these three people, I guess. Xavier's safe. All right, so let's go on to the feeds. First of all, the house guests have been given a deck of cards, and they're playing spades at their new tiny little table. It's always exciting. They're playing cards. This is about the same point in the season where we received cards during my season as well. I begged for dominoes. I'm a big dominoes fan. I just begged and pleaded, whatever you do, give me dominoes. I'll teach these guys games. We'll have a blast. Didn't happen. We got cards instead. And then I never could get everyone to play cards with me. There were one or two people who just weren't big into card games. So instead, Nikki and I spent a lot of time playing solitaire and not having as much fun with those cards as we could have. But that's all right. We do see them playing cards at the table early in the evening. But after that, we do start having some conversations. Let's talk about, first of all, Azah and Xavier talking. They're sitting together talking. They're in the couch in the yacht room. They're talking. Not any real game talk, but there is a bit of deep conversation from Azah about the fact that she's been cussing inside the house, that she doesn't do that outside the house. So she's talking a little bit about that. She's talking about what she has learned about herself while in the house, such as maybe not being as great a communicator as she always has thought she was. They're joking about her staring ability. And I got to say, Azah is definitely the queen of that long stare, that soul penetrating stare, the awkward stare where she just looks at someone and you just feel people melting, trying to figure out how to get out of it. She's got that stare down, guys. But she's talking about that as well. Here's the thing. It's not really, because it's not game talk. It's not strategy talk. It's not so important exactly what she's saying as much as who she's saying it to. The fact that she's kind of spilling her guts a little bit and talking about who she is as a person, it just makes it pretty obvious to me who she is trusting most in this house. And yeah, we knew she had a crush on Xavier. She's had a crush throughout the season, but the way she's talking, she still obviously feels tightest with Xavier of everyone else that's in this house. Now, Xavier at one point towards the end says, man, I gotta get some sleep. It's late. I gotta get to sleep. Azah says, well, can we do like a 5-minute cuddle before you leave? Well, he declines. He says, I'll give you a good night hug instead. Well, here's what I pick out of that. Azah's trying to stay close with Xavier because she trusts him most for gameplay reasons, probably a combination of both, but she's trying to stay very close to Xavier. The fact that he declines a 5-minute cuddle is really suggesting to me that he is trying to distance himself away from her in advance of the next eviction. Maybe he's trying to soften the blow because there is certainly talk. She's certainly one of the big targets. Kyland expects her to go home. So maybe Xavier's just setting her up a little bit, trying to distance himself just a little. So he's definitely pulling away from her just a bit now that he has the power and she doesn't have the power. So I thought that was interesting. All right, we've got Xavier and Kyland in the HOH room talking. Remember, these two are kind of the bros, the bromance, I think, or at least Kyland thinks they're taking each other to a final two. Xavier is saying that unless Azah wins Veto, they're good. Is that true? Well, maybe. I think in Kyland's eyes, it's true. I think Xavier may have a few more. I don't think Kyland is as safe as he thinks he is if Xavier has his way. We'll just leave it at that. We'll talk more about it in a second. But Kyland responds to that comment saying, well, look, here's the thing. Big D does not want to evict Azah this week. So really, we're hoping that I win. Kyland said, I hope that I can win, take myself off the block, put Big D up, take myself off, and then I'll be the one responsible for sending Azah out the door. And so that's what Kyland's plan is. He wins Veto, he votes Azah out. So he's asking Xavier, he's saying, hey, how can we make that happen? How can we ensure that I win that Veto? Well, he doesn't say it outright, but I think Kyland is hinting to Xavier that, hey, maybe whether official or not, you may want to think about pulling back off this Veto competition just a little bit. Let me win the thing and take care of business. Well, now here's the thing. We don't know what the Veto competition is going to be like, but based on past seasons, I expect there's a good chance it's going to be some huge setup in the backyard, probably some type of a timed competition that they do one at a time. Which means it's a little bit harder for Xavier just to slack off a little bit and throw this thing. Even if he wanted to, it's going to be a little harder for him to throw this thing without also taking the chances that Big D or Azah could win this instead. We'll see. We don't know what the Veto is yet, but I do feel like Kyland is at least putting the seeds in Xavier's mind of maybe I just let Kyland have this thing. I don't think Xavier's doing that. I don't think he's in that in a million years. But he's made the suggestion. Xavier is responding, saying, look, here's the thing. Azah wants me to keep the nominations the same, Kyland. And the idea is that Azah wants the nominations to be kept the same and Kyland goes home. But Xavier's saying he doesn't tell Kyland that. He's saying Azah wants to keep the nominations the same. And I told her I would do that, Kyland. If I win the Veto, I'll keep them the same. And the assumption is, from Kyland's standpoint, is that Xavier's willing to do that because then Big D will vote out Azah, and you got the three guys left in the final three. Well, we'll see. All right, but Xavier said that he'll do that. Told her he'll do that if he wins Veto. And again, here's the thing: Azah wants him to keep the nominations the same because Azah believes that if it comes down to it, Big D's going to keep her over Kyland. So yeah, she's trying to talk Xavier into doing just that. Now, would Big D keep Azah safe, send Kyland out the door? He's got relationships with both of them. He's been tight with Kyland. He's been tight with Azah. He's been downplaying the relationship he's had with Azah this week in front of Kyland and Xavier. But what would Big D do if he was forced to make that decision? I think he would keep Azah. I do. I may be wrong, but I think he would keep Azah because I think, and I also think that Xavier probably will keep the nominations the same. And here's what my thinking is on that. First of all, Xavier would love to have a final three with Azah and Big D. So he would try to talk Big D into sending Kyland into jury if Big D is staying off the block and Big D has that final decision. So I think he would try to talk Big D into sending Kyland to jury, saving Azah. And from Xavier's standpoint, the blood is then on Big D's hands. It's not on Xavier's hands. So it benefits Xavier if Big D is the one making the decision. So another reason why Xavier probably would keep the nominations the same. And I think Big D would probably do it. He would probably save Azah because he's got to be thinking in the back of his mind that if a final three of Azah, he's got to be thinking if a final three, Xavier has a very good chance of winning it, deciding who goes to the final two. So if Big D goes along with Xavier's plan, does what Xavier is wanting him to do, which is to send Kyland out and keep Azah, he probably will do that with the anticipation that keeps him on good terms with Xavier, makes it that much more likely Xavier takes him to a final two chair. So for all of those reasons combined, I can see Xavier wanting to keep nominations the same, and I can see Big D, if that's the case, keeping Azah and sending Kyland out the door. Now, obviously, Kyland's thinking completely different. Kyland may learn a big lesson here very shortly in the next couple of days. Now, here's a part of that conversation I thought was interesting as well. Kyland is telling Xavier that if Kyland gets evicted, if Kyland goes to jury, he figures that Xavier probably has an 80 to 90% chance of winning that final 3 competition and deciding who goes to final 2 with him. But if Kyland's still in the house, he figures Xavier probably only has like a 50 or 60% chance of winning that final 3 comp. Why would he say that? Why would he tell Xavier that you've got a much better chance of making the final decision if I'm out of the house? Well, I think it all gets just back to a different mentality between these two. Xavier wants to do what it takes to win the game. Kyland really does seem to be focused on wanting to take the strongest player to the final 2, and he is so convinced that this final 2 is solid and strong and isn't going to be affected by anything else in the house. So I think he feels like he can say anything he wants to Xavier, and they're so tight it's not going to matter. I think he's wrong, and I think he may pay the price here in the next day or two. All right. They continue to talk a little bit, strategy and everything, and they start getting on Big D a little bit. Why is he talking so much? So they eventually decide they want to talk to him, and Kyland says, hey, let me go get him. He's downstairs, probably in bed. I'll go get him. So he takes off. Well, once he leaves, Xavier's talking to the cameras, and he's saying, look, I told Azah I'm not going to use a veto, and I'm not backtracking. So we know what's going to happen if Xavier wins that veto. I think we do. He's also talking to the camera saying, look, Big D is just talking way too much. He needs to stop, and we'll talk about that in a second. Meanwhile, Kyland has gone downstairs. He has found Big D in bed, sleeping. He's woken Big D up. But instead of bringing him back to the HOH, he's just talking to him downstairs. And he's basically telling Big D that if Xavier wins this veto, they need some way to communicate to Xavier that he needs to use the veto on Kyland. Kyland doesn't want to be on the block. Kyland wants to be off the block. He wants to make that final decision. 1, it gives him protection. 2, it gives him yet another resume boost by saying he's the one that decided the final 3. So he's saying, look, we need to figure out how to let Xavier know he needs to use a veto on me. Now, from Big D's standpoint, if that happens, yes, it keeps him from having to get blood on his hands by deciding who goes home between Kyland and Azah. But I'm not certain that Big D wouldn't still prefer to make that decision as opposed to being on the block and having to trust Kyland to save him over Azah. Maybe he's really trusting and Kyland is comfortable doing that. But at least when he's talking to Kyland, he's saying, yeah, pull yourself off, put me on. Yeah, that's fine. So Kyland is very much trying to talk and convince Big D that that's exactly what they need to do. Meanwhile, Xavier is still upstairs waiting. He's telling the cameras, he's saying, look, I'm tired of Big D skating by, never having to do anything, never getting any blood on his hands. I'm just tired of it, which is just more evidence that there's a good chance Xavier is going to force Big D to get some blood on his hands, get his hands dirty by pulling him off the block, keeping him off the block and forcing him to make the decision. Kyland later comes back to the HOH room, tells Xavier, says, Big D was too tired. He's exhausted, said he'll come up, he'll talk later, not come up, he'll talk to you later in the morning or whatever. He's just too tired. But he wants you to use the veto on me if the chance occurs. If you win the veto, Big D very much wants you to use it on me, Xavier. Well, Kyland was pushing that narrative a little bit more than Big D was, but that's what he's passing on to Xavier himself. Xavier's responding saying, look, I'll think about it, man. Maybe I will, but Big D needs to get his hands dirty. He needs to maybe get a little blood on his hands as well. Well played by Xavier. I love the way he has kind of set up this situation. And here's why. Now, Kyland now thinks that Xavier may keep the nominations the same, not because he's targeting Kyland, but just because he wants Big D to get his hands dirty by forcing Azah out the door. So that's what's going on in Kyland's mind. If Big D turns around and sends Kyland out instead, well, now Kyland's upset at Big D. Big D's got the blood on his hands. Kyland and Xavier's relationship is still somewhat preserved. I wouldn't be surprised if Xavier, during a goodbye message, may say, Big D surprised me. I thought we were good. The guy screwed us over, Kyland, and really plays all innocent and everything. So he's protected his relationship with Kyland if he does that. And on the other hand, if Xavier keeps the nominations the same, then he is getting blood on Big D's hands. No matter what Big D decides, he's going to have to hurt a relationship either with Azah or with Kyland. He's going to be considered a little more guilty. It may play. Would it really matter in a final two? No, but from Xavier's eyes, you do everything you can to set yourself up for that final game. So I think this is a well-played situation by Xavier. And of course, it's all assuming he wins the veto. If he doesn't, then it's a whole different scenario. So take that with a grain of salt. But I think he set himself up pretty well. Finish up that conversation. Kyland mentions he is 99.5% certain that Xavier or that Big D will keep him if it comes down to Big D making a decision. I'm thinking the percentages are a whole lot less than that, Kyland. But it just shows Kyland is a very confident player in this game. Sometimes confidence ends up destroying your game. We'll see. I wouldn't be that certain. I can't say I was ever 99.5% certain about anything that took place in the Big Brother house, even what I was going to have for breakfast. That's a lot of percentages, but Kyland's a very confident soul, isn't he? All right, after Kyland leaves, Xavier is again talking to the cameras. He's again complaining that Big D is just talking way too much. He's wondering, as far as the conversation or talking, he's wondering why Big D is talking about wanting to pull Kyland off the block. Why he just keeps talking about that. Obviously, Xavier doesn't want that to happen. He would just rather Big D shut up about it. Whatever happens, and wait till after the veto at least before he starts having that conversations. But he's wondering why he's just going on and on about that Big D. He thinks that Big D's talking so much about it and really pushing to get Kyland out, to get Kyland off the block, just so Big D doesn't have to make that decision, just so he doesn't have to get the blood on his hands. At that point, we've got an extended period of time of Xavier pacing around the HOH room, brushing his teeth, doing everything he can to try to stay busy. At one point, he talks about why is he spiraling so much? Why is this so stressful? Why is it so difficult? I got to say, as a Final Four, that position in the game where a decision you make could cost you or win you $500,000, for him $750,000, that is some of the most stressful conditions I've ever been in. Xavier's feeling the same thing that I was feeling back a couple of years ago. It's tough. It is very tough. All right, finally shut this thing down. Kyland is downstairs. He's going over possible jury votes, trying to figure out who would vote for who in a scenario where it's him and Xavier on the final two chairs. He's telling the cameras that the jury votes won't change who he takes to final two. He's already decided he's taking Xavier if he has that choice. Jury votes won't affect who he takes to final two, but they are going to affect exactly what he says in his speech. And he goes over his speech a little bit. I'm going to say that if he makes it to final two, then we'll talk about speeches and such, because it's kind of a what if scenario right now. But he's going over that. He is worried that he could very well lose Alyssa, Hannah, Brittany, and Tiffany's votes, that they would vote together. He left out Azah and he left out Claire in terms of potential women on the jury. I don't think he'd get Azah's vote versus Xavier, but we'll see. But he's worried about losing those 4 votes. So certainly there's some concern about that. But he is practicing his final two speech versus Xavier. Obviously, the fact that he's practicing a speech assuming Xavier is the final two, it tells me that Kyland is absolutely serious when he has been saying for the last couple of weeks that he wants to take the strongest player to final two with him. I think that's true. I absolutely think that's true. Whether it's the best for your game or not, I think Kyland has figured out what he wants to do. We'll see if he gets a chance. He's got to survive the veto and this week first, and then we'll see what happens. So there you have it, guys. Lights were out around 1:30 or so. Everyone went to bed just a little bit earlier in its anticipation of the veto being held today. There's no veto draw taking place, so I imagine they'll be allowed to sleep in just a little bit. They'll do the veto competition. We'll have a whole lot more information to talk about tomorrow morning, implications of who's won that veto. So until then, guys, y'all have a fantastic Saturday. Enjoy college football. Enjoy being home. Give hugs to family, friends, and loved one. Enjoy this weekend. I will talk to y'all tomorrow. SKD 143. Cheers, my friends. Giga Maggies. Bye. Oh, and I almost forgot to answer the question I asked at the very early part of the conversation. How could the person who wins veto not get to decide who goes to the jury, not decide the final 3? Well, it happens if the veto winner is also the HOH winner. If Xavier wins, he leaves the nominations the same as we've talked about. He's not the one who makes the decision on who's evicted from the house. It'll be Big D. So that is the one scenario when the HOH winner wins a veto that they don't actually get to decide who goes home. The reason I brought that up is because it was discussed during my season. I realized that Nicole is HOH. If she won the veto, I still got to decide who went home, even though I hadn't been the actual veto winner. So there you have it, guys. Just wanted to follow up, answer the question I asked at the very beginning. Cheers, guys. Have a great one. Bye.